Hello, my name is Claire Childers, and I'm doing my text mining project on the student newspapers at Oakland University. So there have been 4 different names of the student newspaper, starting with the Oakland Observer in 1959, and becoming Focus Oakland, the Oakland Sale, and finally the Oakland Post, which is what we know today. So the time frame of our data goes from 1959 to 2022, so a period of roughly 6 decades. Focus areas in content analysis, patterns, and themes. And the scope focuses on editorials, opinions, and news, so advertisements will be ignored. The objective is to gain insights into student life, shifting perspectives, and cultural trends at Oakland University. So the goal is to analyze the evolution and trends of student voices, opinions, and campus culture over time. Some of the questions that come up with that are: what are the dominant themes over different decades? How has the sentiment and opinions changed over time? What issues are consistently important to the student body? And how have major campus events and external events as well influenced student discourse? So the data source, everything is retrieved from the Oakland University Institutional Repository, which is a publicly accessible webpage you can navigate through, and specifically in the Archives and Historical Collections collection is the student newspaper archive, which includes scans of every issue of the student newspaper since 1959. So the structure of this repository includes communities, which have collections, which have items, and each of those objects individually has metadata. Some of the challenges of gathering this data is that there are thousands of items. Some of the articles are very large, or some of the newspapers, I should say, are very large, upwards of 500 megabytes. There are a lot of clicks required to get to all of these pages, and the HTML is pretty complicated to scrape through. Fortunately, the backend API is exposed, and it can be traversed with some knowledge of the server architecture. So by digging into the front end, I was able to find the backend and noticed that it was publicly accessible, and did some research, found the documentation of the backend, and was able to use that to find a way to navigate through the data without needing to scrape through the front end. So the first step is to extract the communities, which can simply be retrieved by accessing the communities endpoint of the server API core URI, which is where the backend API is located. So the communities endpoint just returns a list of all of the communities and its metadata, and we can use that to then get the collections. So with the collections, we access it very similarly. Now that we have the ID of the collection, we can get the metadata, and according to the documentation, we should be able to get the items endpoint as well, but that is restricted to authenticated users only, so we'll have to work around that. So for extracting the items, luckily there is a public open search endpoint that we can use to retrieve an atom feed for the collection, which includes roughly 20 items. And each of those items includes a handle. So it doesn't have the ID that we need, it has a handle. And that handle is a shortened URL that redirects to the URL that we want, which includes the ID. So it requires 2 steps here. First, we need to get the atom feed, retrieve the handles of the items, and then we need to make a GET request to the server to get the UUID of the item. Then once we have the UUID of the item, we can download the files and metadata simply by querying the ID, the item by ID. And then that gives us bundles for the item, and bundles have bit streams, and bit streams have the content that we want to download. So first, retrieve communities. Then for each community, retrieve the collections. For each collection, we parse the atom feed and get the handles of the items. For each handle, we make a request to the server to get the ID of the item, and then we use the ID of the item to get the metadata of that item and the bundles, and use the bundles to get the bit streams, and you use the bit streams to download the content. So in total, over 17,000 items were cataloged in the repository. It took over 17 hours to run. And for the student newspapers, there are 1,768 in total. And that the files themselves took up 34.9 gigabytes of storage. So plan model to analyze. Natural language processing to pre-process the text to make it ready for analysis. Sentiment analysis to identify overall sentiment and opinions. This should show how campus events influence student attitudes over time. Text classification can help identify recurring key issues that have consistently been important. And some additional analysis can be performed as well using the metadata, such as contributors, to identify trends. Expected results. I expect to find recurring topics that reflect concerns and interests during different periods. I think social movements, policy changes, major campus events will likely show dominant themes over time. I expect there to be changes in sentiment across decades reflecting key historical events in civil rights and economic recessions. I expect to find evidence that major campus events and national events influence the content and tone of writing. And I expect to see shifts in the issues that students prioritize, which should show how culture and values have changed over time. Some of the issues that I've faced so far: OCR errors have left some documents' text unreadable. The extracted text includes only symbols, so while those are only a few of the documents, it is significant because those either have to be discarded or fixed in some way. The format of newspapers is also a challenge because articles in newspapers might have a paragraph introduction and then continue on another page. So associating these articles with each other can be difficult if going down the route of separating by article. Then the complexity of the topics discussed in newspaper, as well as the relationships and connections. Certain articles may link to other articles or reference other articles, and that can be very difficult. That's a very complicated relationship that might not be able to be represented in this text analysis project. But these are all issues and challenges to consider in the overall goal of analyzing the trends and topics and feelings over time of the student body at Oakland University.